Hello, thanks for tuning in to this week's special report with me, Lisa Joseph, as we continue to examine the citizenship by investment programs in the OECS sub-region, the MSR Media RICO lawsuits and resulting impacts. One of the factors in the management of the citizenship by investment programs is the maintaining of correspondent banking relationships. On September 2nd, 2024, Bank of St. Lucia issued a statement following reports that the bank had lost correspondent banking with TD Bank in Canada. Bank of St. Lucia, in its statement, said it has not lost nor is it under any threat of losing its correspondent banking relationships as a result of the St. Lucia Citizenship by Investment Program, the CIP. The bank further clarified that rumors circulating on social media regarding the loss of a Canadian correspondent bank relationship due to the CIP program are baseless and untrue. The statement further stressed that none of the correspondent banks have expressed concerns about Bank of St. Lucia's due diligence processes for wire transfers, including those related to the CIP. Now, while Bank of St. Lucia confidently denied the reports, over in Canada, TD Bank has openly disclosed that it is facing significant penalty. An examination by the Financial Crimes Watchdog found faulty anti-money laundering controls. The Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, FINTRAC, which is preparing to impose the penalty, completed an assessment of the bank in late 2023 and deemed its anti-money laundering compliance to be unsatisfactory. Analysts have forecast the fine could be anywhere between $500 million to $1 billion. TD Bank said it was improving its anti-money laundering program and had appointed new executives and advisors to head those efforts. TD Bank is Canada's second largest. It has rapidly expanded in the past few years as it seeks growth opportunities in the United States, where it has about 10 million customers. The situation underscores the risk to the financial system and how crucial the management of the CIP programs are in the sub-region. To help sort through all the issues, I've called upon a reputed economist who has published several research papers in the field of economics. He was an economist at the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, in Washington, D.C., as well as a university lecturer in the United States. He has served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy in Juba, South Sudan, for an organization that monitors the peace process in South Sudan. He is also the political leader of the Dominica United Workers' Party, Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Thank you so much, Dr. Fontaine, for joining us for this conversation. And we want to be able to bring as much depth as we can, especially for the people here in St. Lucia, Dominica, of course, and the rest of the OECS islands, particularly where the CBI programs operate. I want to ask you off the bat, what is the mood like in Dominica right now following the news that correspondent banking there has taken some, I don't want to say a blow per se, but there are issues with correspondent banking. So can you give us an overview of what the view is like?
All right. Well, thank you, firstly, for having me. It's great to be here with you. There's a lot of concern in Dominica. I've been talking to a number of individuals. In fact, last night I was doing a radio program locally, and persons were calling in to ask about just that situation. What it does appear to be is that our banks in Dominica, we now have 2 commercial banks in Dominica from 6 a few years ago, because the other banks like First Caribbean, Barclays Bank, and so on, Scotiabank, they have all left. And part of it had to do with the same problems around the correspondent banking relationships. We are just learning now that one of the 2 banks that we have, National Bank, it is now down to only 1 correspondent bank, and that is the Bank of America. And there's a lot of concerns that people are expressing, and the questions they're asking, of course, is what happens if, for example, Bank of America were to end that relationship. The most recent that we had was with the banks, Lloyds Bank from England, and a couple of banks from Europe that was doing this correspondent banking relationship. They have all pulled out. So it's very, very concerning because people obviously rely very heavily on the banking sector. In Dominica, for instance, we rely very heavily on remittances that come through, not only through the banks, but through MoneyGram, for Western Union, and so on. So that's posing a big for most of Dominica.
Now, the National Bank of Dominica did issue a sort of a update to its customers, clients, and in that update, what the bank said was that that they had switched the GBP and Europe correspondent banking services to Bank of America, as you said, and they said that this change promises faster processing and improved service quality. So that it was first issued on December 21, 2023, and then it was updated again January 20th, 2024. So what does that update from the bank tell you?
Well, I think the bank has put a very nice on it, but the reality is they will be risked by Lloyds Bank and Crown agents. These were the banks that for the British. So yeah, it's okay to say that it's but there is persons are having to pay a lot more now for those. I just spoke to a friend of mine just yesterday who was trying to make a transaction into the National Bank through bank in the US. And you have to convert that you have to convert that into Canadian dollars before it comes back into the EC. And you lose substantive big foreign exchange that you, the customer, have to absorb because of that. So I don't think it is any easier. I think it is worse. More is always preferred to less. And the fact that we are down to one is a real cause of concern.
There, he was asked this about the de-risking at a press conference. I want to play his response to that question, and then we will get into further conversation as to why this would have happened.
It appears that Dominica is having, from what I gather from sources, having difficulty moving money from the Citizen by Investment Program through international banks to source programs like the airport and housing and other CBI-funded projects. How does government plan to resolve that situation?
The citizenship and residency programs the world over are having challenges where banking is concerned. So it is not, and if you speak to any of the countries in the Caribbean, they'll tell you so. If you speak to Malta, if you speak to any one of them, they'll tell you so. You have challenges in this. The bank has rules, and everybody has to respect the rules. I do not believe that the bank is being unduly unreasonable. You understand? They have to deal with correspondent banks, and we have been working with the banks on this. The banks has indicated the process to follow and the documentation that they need and so on, which are very transparent in my view. I saw them, I read them this morning again, which are very transparent rules. So there are times you will have challenges of some funds coming in, like every other business. There are many Dominicans who have challenges bringing, or Caribbean people, because this is why we've been talking, for example, of the risking that's taking place in the globe. We've been talking about for years. For years, I've been talking about this for 20 years. On the issue of de-risking, and this is the issue that CARICOM has been preoccupied with, the Commonwealth has been preoccupied with. There are some banks within the Caribbean community space with no correspondent banking services, none. You know, so it's very, very difficult for developing countries like ours, and similarly to with regards to climate change. And I do not believe that our citizens appreciate and understand the complexities of this world, and so when we speak about these things, people must not see it as if it is a government issue. This is an everybody issue, because if you do not have correspondent banks, you're unable to trade with the rest of the world. You understand? You're unable to trade with US currency, unable to trade with euros, unable to trade with pounds, unable to trade with any currency. And therefore, it's absolutely important that all of us, and I've said so to the private sector entities when I meet with them, I say, look, you have to speak on these things. Because if you do not speak on these things, and we in the Caribbean, we end up losing correspondent banking services, that's it for your business. Because 98% of your transactions is also with the outside world by purchasing stuff from the outside world, and you have to make those payments to external accounts, and therefore you need the correspondent banks. Otherwise, banks in the Caribbean, there are many banks in the Caribbean and in the developed world that are largely just simply like credit unions. They cannot transact with the outside world, and so you have these challenges, but it's a challenge that you have to deal with on an ongoing basis.
So, Prime Minister, what is your alternative?
Well, no, I mean, they are. We are addressing the issues. You know, there's no need, there's no intention on our part to make shortcuts or anything. I think we have to address the issue as it is, and to seek to find a solution to it. But I understand that it's a huge challenge. This is why you have many of the local contractors who haven't gotten the monies yet. It's not that the money is not available; it's unable to get them. Is inability or difficulty getting to them. You understand? And I'm happy that people are understanding these things. That, and we should not wait for it to affect us personally for us to appreciate the challenge that we are confronted with.
And so you have Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit this. That was on July 15, where he was addressing, I believe, maybe for the first time, the de-risking, the level of de-risking that's happening there. And due to the CIP, so I want to ask you, it's a very broad brush question. Why did this happen? Do we have any firm understanding?
Well, we understand that the reason why we're having these difficulties, why, for example, monies are not able to come into Dominica now to service the port or to build a school that was taking place in Dominica. The reason for that is the failure of our government to adequately place safeguards in the CBI program. For years now, countries, the United States, Europe, and countries elsewhere were indicating that the CBI, as they are devised in the Caribbean, was posing a security threat to their countries. And we saw the British retaliating very severely in last year, imposing visa restrictions on Dominica because of that. Previously, it was done by Canada. And we had the EU coming in very strongly and indicating that they may have to stop the program, or they may have to stop visa-free access for Dominica and other CBI countries, measures to prevent that. So the problem is security concern. The problem is the lack of due diligence that is being done by those countries, and also the way that they've approached this whole CBI program. There's been a very cavalier attitude, very reckless attitude. You know, we have cases or instances of course individuals, criminals, downright criminals who have passports. There was this famous case in the United Kingdom of Russians who were coming into the Ukraine war, who were coming into the UK with Dominica passports. Some of them have been expelled from the United Kingdom. They were coming back with new passports from Dominica. So in a way, the governments have brought that onto themselves by failing to deal with this issue of due diligence, by failing to tighten up on the program. And we've had instances as well where passports have been sold for less than the amount. And that is the reason why the United last year brought together all of the countries in the Caribbean. In fact, there was they just had the second meeting a couple of days ago in Grenada, where all of the CBI countries in the Caribbean, along with the United States Treasury, agreed on 6 protocols. And among these protocols, and I think that points to the problems that we have with the program, among those protocols is the need for there to be collective agreements. So what was happening, for example, is that if, let's say, a client goes to St. Lucia and that client is denied, he would simply come over to Dominica or Grenada or St. Kitts and be accepted. So you had a situation where persons who were probably denied in one jurisdiction were now getting their passports in another. And so the United States, one of the protocols is that there must be collective agreement, meaning that if one individual is denied in one country, they cannot get in. Then on the question of interviews, every person seeking a passport must be interviewed. That's the second protocol. The third one has to do with additional background checks that needs to be done. And the fourth one has to do with Russians not giving passports to Russians and those from Belarus, as well as the creation of audits and the whole question of how you deal with when the passports are revoked. So these are all in place now. The countries have signed on to it, but the herein is the problem, is the failure to deal with those issues that has brought us to where we are.
Now, Prime Minister Skerrit, in the last month or so, there was a revocation of some 68 passport citizenships. And one of the reasons stated or reported would have been the underselling of those citizenships in the market, people having to obtain those citizenships below what the prescribed minimum price is. Now, that is an issue that was raised by MSR Media when it then filed its lawsuit in a U.S. federal court against St. Kitts, Nevis and St. Lucia, where it alleges that this underselling and other bad practices within the CIP business has damaged its ability for it to be able to recoup its monies in investment in St. Kitts. So I want to ask you about the underselling. To your knowledge, is this very widespread? And has MSR Media shined a light on the problems within the CBI so that we can have the due adjustment that we should?
Yeah, you know about the 68 passports that were revoked. That to me is just the tip of the iceberg. We believe that this is a widespread practice, also a practice that was well known to the government. Because bear in mind, these are not the clients taking those prices. These are prices offered by authorized agents of the Dominican government and of St. Lucia. So that is a serious problem. The fact of the matter is, the Caribbean countries have treated the CBI as an open marketplace. And an open marketplace, you're trying to be the most attractive seller. And one is to increase your sales, is to lower your price. And that is exactly what has been happening, because this citizenship program as simply a matter of trading, buying and selling. And so you have a number of agents who are actually trying to outsell the competition by lowering the price, providing discounts. But I think it is also unfair that the clients who had absolutely no knowledge of this have been penalized. I'll give you an example of one client whose passport was revoked, who reached out to me as the leader of the opposition in Dominica to complain that he feels that it is unjustified because he did not go on the black market. He purchased before he went for the passport. He did his research. He realized that this particular agent was a authorized agent. So he knew he did it legally. So he legally got a passport at a reduced fee. And he was asking why it is that he has to be the one to be penalized. He's lost the fees that he's saying why that is very unfair to him. And I agree. So I think it's a question, and some can say as well, that is creeping into all of this, because what we see is that individuals have got reach out of this program. Whilst it is true the countries have benefited to some extent, it is also true have benefited tremendously from this program. Millionaires have been out of the CBI program. So there's an element of greed in that as well. The passport money has been made, and nobody seemed to worry. But at the end of the day, we have the problems that we're having now, where government, and how embarrassing it is that a legitimate government is getting money to its country from purportedly sales of a legitimate product. And that to me is a problem.
That sort of mismanagement, and if we can call it that, a mismanagement of the programs, the unlawful sale would seem that it's exposing the island's financial institutions to international legal scrutiny. But you would hear from the various leaders that the onus is on the applicant to be able to go on their websites and to see what the minimum price is and all of that sort. But I'm hearing you clearly that you're saying that we should not be putting the blame on the applicant. So where, and I've asked this to numerous persons I've interviewed on this matter, so I'm going to ask it to you as well. At what point, where exactly in this process should the question of whether the right price has been paid ought to be asked or flagged? Where in the processing of the due diligence?
You know, it should not be done, period. And I believe that upfront, because there are some individuals, in fact, the individual that I spoke to, he only got attracted to the program when the new price was offered. So he went onto the website and realized that for a certain period of time, his parent was offering a discounted price for the passport. So I was concerned. That was the official price of the passport. You see, so what happens is that the agents, obviously, when they're publicizing, they will make those pronouncements. They will say for a limited time only, bring citizenship for X amount of dollars. In this case, it was $70,000. All right. So I don't blame the clients. I think the onus is on the agents and the government to take the action necessary. And what the government has done to revoke this to me is not enough. They were supposed to have moved to immediately terminate those agents that are involved in this, because it has certainly brought the country into disrepute, and the whole is now suspect because of the behavior of those agents, and they should be punished. And the question to me is why it is those agents being punished, because all are responsible. They have the authority given to them by the government of Dominica, by the government of St. Kitts, by the government of St. and Grenada to go out there and interface with the public. The government is only responsible for receiving. On the other hand, I also blame those governments. You see, because there should be a point, and even when the audits have been done, to say, but wait a minute, why are we receiving 70,000? No flags were raised by the government. No flags were raised by local CBI officers. And the question is why? It tells me that they too were complicit in what was happening. It is on the government and on the agents.
And, just it would have been just towards the ending of August, there within a week, we've seen that the government, the CIU unit there in Grenada, has issued a sort of memo, press release there on underselling. And it had to admit that China Hengzhen company, private company, had been underselling its citizenships in the marketplace. So it really does underscore that this problem is indeed widespread. But we also hear the sort of what I consider to be a flippant response that really can the CIUs and the government control what the marketers are doing, what the promoters are doing?
But of course they can. They are working on behalf of those governments. They have the fear, even the right by the government to act. So the government obviously has control. They can revoke this if they see they're not behaving in a manner that they wish. They have not done that. It certainly tells me where the problem is. In fact, it is happening to hear that Grenada actually named agents that were involved in the underselling. No such thing happened in Dominica. The Dominican public are yet to be told what the agents have been underselling our passports. I happen to know because he reached out to me, who was a victim client, told me who the agent was. But that reported by our government. So the blame rests squarely. In fact, the buck stops squarely on the part of the governments, on the prime ministers of those countries, the ones that need to take responsibility. They need to ensure that that does not happen under their watch.
Minister Skerrit there in the clip saying that the bank had indicated, well, it gave them the rules, the documentation that is needed when you're doing the processes. And he says that he doesn't believe that the bank is being unduly unreasonable. And he says that the rules are transparent. So I want to ask you, this sort of awakening that the Prime Minister had there, it's almost as if like he never knew, or maybe the officials at the scene didn't know what the process requires?
Yeah, I mean, it's strange. As you said, he's been doing that for over 20 years. So he must be aware of what is required. The Prime Minister, as the Minister of Finance for most of those 20 years, must know what is required in terms of knowing your consumer, knowing your code that the banks demand, the kind of information that you have to give to the banks. The problem is what the banks are grappling with, and it's not so much the banks that are to be blamed, but those correspondent banks, tremendous pressure by the U.S. Treasury. There have been fines. For example, Bank of America threatened with a $2 billion fine if they did not clamp down on some transactions with the Caribbean. So those banks that are doing the correspondent banking, tremendous pressure by the users to be sure that they can control this. And what is happening more recently is all of a sudden, all of these monies are coming or being attempted to come into the islands. And the correspondent banks are saying, well, wait a minute, do we know the sources of those funds? So they're asking the bank, do you know this money is coming from person out there, somewhere in Dubai or some account in Dubai? Do you know who these people are? Do you know what the sources of those funds are? They're saying, yes, it's from the CBI program. But the question is, who are those funds who are buying into this? And so that information is not the banks, that's information that the government and the CBI offices are supposed to be given to the banks to allow that access, and they have not been.
And you mentioned there about the fines of the regulators, the U.S. Treasury, and we heard of TD Bank because there was an article that came off there by blogger and financial crime analyst Kenneth Rijok. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but then he did indicate that Bank of St. Lucia here that a relationship had been terminated with TD Bank. The Bank of St. Lucia has subsequently said no, that is not so, that the correspondent banking is in place and it's not under any threat of losing its correspondent banking. However, TD Bank over the last 3 months has been preparing itself for the fines that the regulators, especially US regulators and Canadian regulators, may be imposing on it for money laundering. Because, in the course of the investigation, it was found that they did not do enough due diligence on monies that were coming in, checks that were being cashed and so forth. And they've already set aside nearly $500 million for those fines. But we're being told that it may be up to $1 billion that they may be fined, according to the industry observers. And it clearly underscores that those big banks have a lot to lose. And TD Bank also had to do away with plans for its acquisition of another bank over in the US as a result. So this is very serious business. And I'm wondering, and I'm going to ask you this question, while here we may say that the correspondent banking for Bank of St. Lucia is not in danger, but given the fact that TD Bank is under this tremendous pressure and the possible penalties that it is facing, would TD Bank now take a closer look at all of its transnational transactions that are being done and may very well decide that it may take a bit of a step back to ensure that everything is in order as a result of what it is facing right now?
You know, you're absolutely correct. That's exactly what's going to happen. TD Bank has no obligation to this bank. Bear in mind that the amount of monies that those banks are making from maintaining this correspondent banking relationship, very small amount compared to those fines. So if they fine that is now to be levied against them is $1 billion, there's no way they can make that money over not even 20, 30 years in the Caribbean. It's much easier to start. That's why a number of banks have done just that. And it is true, as the Prime Minister said, that it's not only in Dominica and St. Lucia, but in Belize and in Trinidad and elsewhere in the Caribbean. In fact, more than 20 jurisdictions have been impacted by this correspondent banking law. And I would not be surprised if in the case of St. Lucia decides to step back. At the end of the day, they're going to weigh the potential fine against them and the benefit from maintaining that relationship. And I think most times the banks will say it's not worth it, and they will just leave that alone. So it comes back. The onus comes back on the local authorities to do their work, to do whatever to prevent money laundering, to prevent the transfer of drug proceeds, because a lot of the banking relationships that we've had that has gone sour in the past was probably around drug dealings and so on, and money laundering. The CBI is a more recent thing, but it is also very significant given sums of money involved, millions of dollars.
I just want to stick in that caveat there that with TD Bank over in Canada, the charges of money laundering really centers around a Chinese drug ring with fentanyl. And it would seem that they were going around to the various branches and literally in-person cashing checks and so forth in various names and so forth. So I just wanted to give the audience an understanding that it's not necessarily monies or money laundering from the Caribbean and the CIP in the Caribbean. I wanted to be able to stick that in there. However, TD Bank has given a list of policies and procedures that it will be putting in place to be able now to, as we say, fix up itself, to make sure that it is okay with the regulators. I want to ask one other thing coming from Prime Minister Skerrit response to the de-risking in Dominica, and then we'll move on. He said that people need to speak up about it. He called upon the private sector, not just in Dominica, but across the region. But at the same time, and especially here in St. Lucia, in discussing the issue, some believe that in discussing the issue, you are pretty much destroying the country, and you ought not to discuss that. But there we have Prime Minister Skerrit is saying it's worthy of discussion. So, and I'm wondering what level of discussion he was referring to, whether it's behind closed doors or in the public domain. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what he was alluding to is that the businesses should start basically saying, we'll be in trouble, be bad for us, be in the private sector to get this. Basically telling them, if you cry loud and long enough, it is possible that the regulators may ease up. But that's not going to factor. The United States and the UK government, they're protecting their own interests. That's the bottom line. So no amount of crying, no amount of talking about it locally is going to make a difference. What will make a difference is action. This action involves ensuring that program, the CBI program, is well pulled. The CBI program, the 6 protocols that I mentioned, are here to that the governments are acting responsibly when it comes to the program, and that's what's going to make a difference.
So as we move on, I want to quote from the Economist Intelligence Unit, which you would be familiar with. And it says that Caribbean financial systems have experienced more damage to correspondent banking relationships than has been in the case in any other region, owing to the fallout from the international fight against financial crime. It says about 40% of correspondent banks have withdrawn from the Caribbean over the past 15 years, which has reduced the region's access to international finance and credit and has restricted cross-border payments, including remittances. And it also says that without reforms, businesses and individuals will continue to face higher transaction costs and burdensome requirements to participate in the formal financial system weighing on the business environment. So it's just underscoring what we've been saying here. But 40% of corresponding banks have withdrawn from the Caribbean. And I think at the top of the opening there with you, you were saying that it's not just about maybe bad practices within. There are other reasons as to why this would happen. Maybe the profitability for those larger banks. So apart from these ill transactions within the financial system, what else can trigger the loss of correspondent banking?
The main reason why banks de-risk is when they feel that the banks, the local banks, are being used as transit points for money, property financing of terrorism, monies that cannot financial flow that cannot be explained, and so that's usually what triggers. They will withhold and relationships when they think that they're going on. So if suddenly you start to see huge inflows of monies into Trinidad and so on, and you wonder where is this money coming from? Sold to be bringing in. So those kinds of questions have been asked, and it's when those flows become unexplainable, because it could be some chic somewhere, or some heavily into drugs and so on, trying to hide those monies, and that's when they're concerned and they trigger that. And you talk about the average for the Caribbean. We have lost 9 of our correspondents. As I said, we're down to one bank now, National Bank, and I think 2 banks, Republic Bank. So we've come a long way before. So it is a very serious problem, and unless these issues are addressed, at the end of the day, the average person in St. Lucia, in Dominica, in Grenada, we are the ones that were going to be suffering. Because imagine where you have a situation where you're no longer able to have transactions through Western Union or through MoneyGram, or your family is no longer able to send you a bank transfer. That could create some serious problems for us in the Caribbean region.
And now, over in St. Kitts, as I say, that's sort of epicenter, if you will, for the MSR, the RICO lawsuit. St. Kitts and Nevis is one of the least transparent countries in terms of releasing its CBI reports. Now, that's according to Investment Migration Insider, IMI. It's one of the most reputable investor migration consulting firms. And IMI has also credited Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew, upon assuming office, for committing to reform. Let's take a listen to Prime Minister Drew, and then we'll discuss.
I've gone through multiple ministries, sectors, institutions to highlight the corruption that was met. Almost everything was premised on corruption. Deeply corrupted. Still bothers me. How is it an administration, a political entity that premised itself on good governance, end up having one of the most corrupt administration that we have seen? How did that happen? Is the corruption why that entity fell? At the heart of it, it was corruption, misinformation, dishonesty, distrust that caused it to fracture when it fractured. And the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, in their wisdom, recognize that this does not represent what we wanted. The CBI, just like anything else, is no different. And so we wanted to make sure that the CBI would be premised on good governance principles. So I'll go through a chronology of all the things that this administration would have done under my leadership. August 2022, Prime Minister ordered an internal review of the CBI program. I was sworn in on August 6, 2022. One of the first things that I did was to order an internal audit of the CBI program. Of course, this program had been running since the 1980s, 1984. To get a full, it will take some time. But I wanted a quick view as to what was taking place so that we can start making the changes. Since taking office, that was one of the first things I did with respect, and that was August 2022. December 1st, 2022, I, as the Prime Minister, of course, the cabinet, made a visit to Dubai to meet with agents and CBI stakeholders. I went to discuss with them about the evolved CBI program that we are introducing based on sustainability and good governance. In December 2023, we brought new CBI regulations. They were published. Board of Governors introduced oversee operations of CIU, review developer applications, and prepare submissions to Cabinet. Technical committee set up to review files and advise Minister. Underselling / discounting was criminalized. I want to stress on that. Criminalized. When we made the changes, we made it a criminal act to undersell or discount our CBI program.
Prime Minister Dr. Terence Dew there of St. Kitts Nevis, and he seems to be blazing the trail, if you will, where reforms are concerned. And, you know, I believe that the Prime Minister perhaps understands the importance of not just talking about the issue behind closed doors, but to be seen, being proactive. And one of the other things that he also spoke about is legislation for the advertising and marketing of the program as well. So I want to get your thoughts in there.
No, this is excellent. This is truly a breath of fresh air. And that's the kind of proactive action that I've been talking about. I think that is where all the governments need to be moving. You see, what he pointed to is a high level of corruption within the CBI program in this country. But I think the same can be said. I can speak for Dominica. We've had the same issues in Dominica. We've had problems with millions. The opposition, we did some kind of audit, and we've estimated that as much as $6 to $8 billion of our CBI proceeds are outside of Dominica in private hands. And so you have a system that is incredibly corrupt, and it is good to see the Prime Minister, the way he stepped up, because he understands the importance of this. I mean, let's face it, the CBI program is critically important for countries like Dominica and St. Kitts, probably not so much St. Lucia for now, but in terms of St. Kitts, it accounts for over 50% of government revenues. In Dominica, over 60%. I think in St. Lucia, it's probably more around 4%. But it shows you how critical it is that governments take action. That is the only way you're going to save the program. Failure to take this kind of decided action, as we've seen in the case of St. Kitts, will result in the Caribbean losing that program, and that will be a real disaster for the countries.
There's been a school of thought that we need to divorce the politician from the CBI units, the CBI programs. Do you believe that's one of the reforms that could be a positive?
The problem with this is that it involves the issuance of passports, and that should ultimately be under the purview, the responsibility of the government. Now, one could argue that you can divorce the issuance of the passport with the way the program itself is managed and so on, but that would be a bit more difficult in my view. I think what is required is what we've seen, as was done in St. Kitts. You have legislation that criminalizes certain type of behaviors. So if agents, for example, are beginning to undersell the passport, they could go to jail, they could be fined. These are the kind of proactive measures that you need. Not so much removing it outside of the purview of government, but having government have stricter and more firm control and oversight of the program is what is required.
I want to share with so that they can get a better understanding about the due diligence process, because we just discussed it earlier on. We'll talk a little bit more about it now. So I want to let them know that the process is very robust. As it is structured, 6 separate entities review a CBI application. You have the authorized agents, the country's CBI unit. There's an expert international due diligence firm, crime prevention and detection agencies, partner governments, a correspondent bank in the US or in the EU that receives the money from the applicant. The whole process typically takes about 3 months, some maybe a bit longer. And during that time, the applicant will provide personal information and in some cases, fingerprints, you have an iris scan for those who are very advanced, and proof of residency in every country where the applicant has lived for more than 6 months. And a third-party due diligence firm also reviews again. The applicant's information then passes through the law enforcement and intelligence agencies via the Joint Regional Communication Center, that's the JRCC of the of CARICOM, Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, that's IMPACTS. The JRCC cross-references the applicant's information with the international watch list databases, Interpol, and partner governments, including the US, the United States Customs and Border Patrol, Canada, the EU, and the UK. Now, this sounds as rigid as you possibly can, with so many layers there of protocols, processes, of dozens and dozens of eyes, pairs of eyes looking through these applications. So, how are we still here? With claims by MSR, with what's happening in your home country, Dominica? Why for so many years the CBIs have been dogged with allegations of fraud and corruption? With all of this?
The bottom line is, it has just not been done. They've put it down on paper to satisfy the authorities in the UK and the EU, but the fact of the matter is, when it comes down to it, it has been a race to the bottom with those programs in terms of underselling, but also in terms of which country can turn around the quickest. And so, whilst it is true all of that is listed has been done, the fact of the matter is this has not been done. I mean, how do you explain the large number of just common criminals who have been found with our passports? In the case of Dominica, we have chronicled scores and scores of criminals who a simple internet search would indicate that those individuals were criminals. Either they will be before the courts or something, yet they get those passports. How do you explain somebody being deported from the United Kingdom, turns up with 3 Dominica passports in London a few months after being deported? It is clear that those things are not being done, and that is the problem. This is the beef, if you like, that the UK, the European Union, and the Americans have with our programs in the Caribbean. They're simply not doing what they are supposed to do, and that is where we have the problems.
Now, Prime Minister Drew, as part of his proactiveness upon assuming office, understanding the value of the CBI to his country, he had proposed the establishment of a due diligence unit in the EU, and he's asked for the other islands to sort of join up and so that they can maintain this office there in the EU. Do you believe this is going to have any impact at all?
Well, it's not so much the EU as having a setup of due diligence in the countries. For example, if you're trying to process somebody from Iran, it is possible that this person with a criminal background in Iran may not be on the radar of law enforcement in the European Union, or they may not have access to that kind of information. To me, if you're going to have a robust due diligence, it has to be a system where you can link up with country authorities in the particular country of the applicant, because most times, crimes are not widely reported in some countries. Individuals who probably have issues with the law, they may not be known out there. They may not be on an Interpol list, but they may be on a local police list. And so, to me, it involves more than just setting up due diligence firms in remote countries. You see, because the same way, Dominica, for example, for many years used a due diligence firm in the United States. Now, that is okay if you're going to be looking at the background of United States citizens, because they would have access to databases in the US. But to ask that same firm to do due diligence on somebody, say from Portugal or somebody from Belarus or so on, is probably not going to work. So I think we need to rethink how we do that due diligence, and that is at the heart of this. You see, all of the problems we are having now, the difficulty in moving the monies to the Caribbean, the corruption that we are speaking about, all of that has to do with goes back to this due diligence issue or problem that we're having.
Now, Dominica, you lost your visa-free access, and you indicated it earlier, to the UK. How has that impacted Dominica at all?
Oh man, this is one of the most painful things that has happened. I mean, you know, Dominicans, we're used to visiting relatives and so on without any problems, traveling to the UK and so on, and that has been imposed. And you should note that it was only imposed against Dominica. St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Grenadans, they still have access to the UK. So it is something that Dominica did that led to this problem. So for us, we blame the government, and they should be blamed for that. But more importantly, that's posed a severe strain because now added costs of travel, you have to go for a process to apply for the visa. It takes time, it is time consuming, it is costly, it is inconvenient, and it is just not ideal. And so for us, it's a huge problem. And I think the bigger concern now that is on the back of everybody's mind is whether or not the European Union will do the same. And they threaten, remember the European Union, they threaten that unless the countries take corrective measures, that they could be doing the same thing. You know, and what I'm thinking as well is that if we were to lose visa-free access to Europe, that would possibly spell the end of the program itself.
The EU, tremendous pressure. And, you know, Prime Minister Ju has been very open, saying that he really sort of led the charge to have the 5 OECS CBI countries to really come together, meet with the EU to hear what they're saying, and to reassure them, and to be able to put certain measures in place to sort of appease them and to let them know that, hey, we're taking this very seriously. Do you believe there's an inevitable loss of the Schengen visa? Is it inevitable?
It seems likely because I still see a lot of conflicting information coming out from our governments. It does not appear to me as if they're doing everything that they should be to fix the problem. The issues still remain. The lack of accountability, the lack of transparency, it is still there. You know, we've not been able to get from our government any information in Parliament about even the number of persons who have been issued passports, their nationalities, the basic information we've not been able to get from our government. So this if cloak or this blanket of corruption still exists, and as long as the program is being viewed as a threat, as a potential threat to the European Union, and that potential threat is in the form of enabling individuals to come into the countries who otherwise would have not been able to come in. As long as that is there, we have a problem. And bear in mind as well, one of the biggest failings of our program has been to even issue passports in new names. So imagine you are now equipping individuals who possibly could be under a particular name, have a drug record or a criminal past, and now they come to your country and they have a brand new passport, with a brand new name. You are actually issuing new identities, and that is where the danger and the problem is in that program. And to me, that needs to be fixed. There should be under no circumstances where individuals should be given new identities under that program. That should be stopped. That should be illegal. So there are practical things that those countries need to do, and I fear that unless we do those things and we do it quickly, we could lose this EU Schengen visa access. And the authorities there, they're looking very, very closely at what is going on in the islands right now. And
you know that we've heard within the MSR suit, RICO lawsuit, it alleges that kickbacks were given to individuals in order for the facilitation of the underselling of the citizenships. That within itself is very troubling, and I would imagine that is one of the sort of roadblocks in being able to ensure that due diligence is done right and as perfect as possible.
Yes, indeed, and it goes beyond that. I mean, the European Union, for example, they've been very clear that countries, especially countries like Dominica, they need to be repatriating the monies to their countries. That's one of the stipulations that they have, because these countries, the European Union countries, are aware that monies that were meant for Dominica are being siphoned elsewhere. And they were very adamant that if this program is going to continue, whatever returns are derived from those passports must go directly to the country. So imagine the European governments have to stand up on behalf of our people, for us, against our government. I mean, this is shameful. You know, the fact that we've seen the hundreds of millions of dollars that have gone through. St. Lucia, probably you don't understand the full extent because it has not been as big. St. Lucia, I believe, makes in the region of 60, probably $70 million. In Dominica last year, it was over $400 million that was brought in. And we still, based on the number of passports that were sold, because when we did a count recently, we were approaching 50,000 passports that have been sold under that program. Now, if you do the calculations, you're talking about literally billions of EC dollars that should have come to Dominica, but it's out there whilst the people in Dominica are catching hell. I talked earlier about the inability of the government to even meet the payments to National Employment Program people. These are temporary government workers. They've not been paid, and we're already well into a week since the end of the month. So you have those problems, and my fear is that unless the government takes decisive action, unless they can convince the countries of the EU that these monies are beneficial to the countries and to the country's population, we will be up against those visa restrictions in those countries.
Yeah, and the same question is being asked here about, those monies, because from our real estate option, the developer in the real estate option, the MSR Media is alleging that we have the hundreds of millions of dollars that should come to St. Lucia that has not come to St. Lucia, and alleging the same thing over in St. Kitts Nevis as well. In fact, the jail project over in St. Kitts has not been delivered, and the citizenships given somewhere in the region of 5,500, and nothing to show for it, and so the question is quite a relevant one. I want to be able to just to encapsulate for the audience the importance of the CBI and its revenue. We have an insert there from the Prime Minister of Grenada, Dickon Mitchell, and he was speaking at an investment migration conference which was held in Grenada May this year. So let's take a listen to him.
We believe that all of our development We believe that all of our development partners have come to accept that the programs play a significant role in attracting direct foreign investment to the region, which otherwise would not be available. And I don't want to say this in a flippant manner. I can use Grenada as an example. Outside of one single hotel that has been built in the last 25 years. Every major tourism development in the hotel space in Grenada has been funded via the CBI program. So I want you to understand the context of what I've just said. With the exception of one major hotel, all of the other hotel properties have been funded through the CBI program. So you could therefore imagine Grenada without the hotels that have been funded through the CBI program.
Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell there of Grenada underscoring the importance of the CBI in its tourism industry. But the importance is not lost on you over in Dominica because over the years you've had literally communities built through the proceeds of the CBI. So I want to ask you, do you believe that the governments are making enough use of the CBI funds? Or are millions still being squandered?
Well, yes, one, millions have still been squandered, and secondly, not enough use has been made. Yes, it is true. I can give the government credit for building some homes with the CBI funds. They built some hotels. Kempinski Hotel is one. Jungle Bay Resort in Dominica also benefited. Secret Bay. We have about 4 or 5 hotels that have been financed through the CBI program in Dominica. A secondary school is being built, but we've always maintained that given the level of resources this government has been able to bring in for those programs, this money should really have been channeled to more sustainable parts of the economy. By that I mean the government should have been able to use some of those resources, for example, to invest in factories and water, probably a water processing plant, probably an agro-processing enterprise, to do things that are sustainable so that when the program ends, as it will someday, that those monies can be sustained and can be used for other purposes. So I'm not happy with the use, the overall use. I don't believe that hotels is the only area that should be looked at. There must be other areas that can be done. And the other thing to note as well, it's true, homes have been built in Dominica, but the fact of the matter is these homes do not belong to the people that live in them. It still belongs to the government. So that's another issue that we have to contend with in Dominica.
Why do the homes still belong to the government?
I suspect it has to do with the relationship, because bear in mind, these CBI, this program, this investment part of the program, it is really the investor in exchange for some ownership. So for example, when you build a hotel, the persons who purchase those passports, they should have a stake, a claim in that hotel. I believe it's a similar thing that is happening there. If you're now building homes, it is possible that the persons who have purchased those passports, they're the ones that have the claim. And that is probably one of the reasons why we've seen the government not being able to give, basically to be able to give the titles to individuals who live in those homes. So it's a very tenuous position. It is based upon, of course, people's support for the government. So if in the future they stop supporting the government, there's a likelihood that those homes will be taken away from them. But that is the situation that we have in Dominica. Certainly not ideal.
It's certainly not ideal, and we probably talk about something that's similar that's alleged to have happened here in St. Lucia with our developer under the real estate option. So we'll get to that shortly. But we were talking about the importance of the CBI revenue, and for St. Lucia, the total revenue for the program back in 2021-2022, the fiscal year, it reached $160 million, and that was double the figure for the preceding year. The real estate investment saw a surge at an estimated $63 million, and the National Economic Fund contributions and the bond investment provided $51.8 million and $44.9 million, all of that in US dollars, respectively. Interestingly, the 2024-2025 estimates of revenue and expenditure, it said that 64.1 million EC dollars was received by the National Economic Fund, and that from that amount, $45 million was transferred directly to the Treasury, the Consolidated Fund. The contribution, the Prime Minister said this when he delivered his budget address, the contribution was less than the approved estimates of 90 million EC dollars for 2023-2024. So overall, the CBI or the CIP in St. Lucia contributed 121 million EC dollars for 2023-2024. For this year, 2024-2025 fiscal year, it is projected that the CBI will contribute directly direct revenue of $75 million. So we've seen a dip here. And that's where it gets even more interesting. Before you come in here, it gets more interesting. The Prime Minister said the reason for the difference between the approved estimate and the projected outturn is due to an increase in demand for the real estate option rather than the donation option, which goes directly to the government, into the National Economic Fund, or for the government bond option. So it would almost seem as if there's a competition happening within the government space to be able to draw the interest of the applicants under the CIP or CBI. Fascinating, is it? What do you think?
Yes, indeed. But what it also shows as well is that in the case of St. Lucia, the monies that come through the real estate option and the government bond option does not really come back directly into the budget. And that should be concerning. And we have the same issues back in Dominica. We have been asking why it is that those monies are not coming back directly into the budget. Even if it's under the contribution part of it or the real estate, all of those monies really should be coming in through the consolidated fund. Every single dollar of government revenue must by law come in through the consolidated fund. So that is the battle that we're having in Dominica, and I suspect a similar thing is happening in St. Lucia. And that's a legitimate question to ask. Why it is that all of the money is not coming in through the consolidated fund into government coffers.
And so I want to introduce an insert now from Eric Major. He is the executive chairman of Latitude Group. It's a leading residency and citizenship by investment firm. And he has a podcast called Latitude World. And there he's talking about earlier this year when St. Lucia had not signed on as yet to the memorandum of agreement with the other CBI islands. So he was given what he believes is a situation that was going on because our government was talking about contractual obligations as to why it could not have signed on to the memorandum of agreement. So let's hear Eric Major as to why he believes this was happening.
St. Lucia has entered into an agreement with an important developer that is one of the approved projects for their real estate arm, their real estate route. And that developer has, through its own funding, provided financing to investors in the same way that you as a client could go see a bank to borrow in order to purchase a home. They were offering some financing for you to purchase a unit in their development. And that meant that the capital outlay that applicants who chose that program was less than $100,000 or $200,000. But it simply meant that they were borrowing, and how that loan got repaid was through a creative arrangement where in the end you'd hand over the keys back to the developer and no longer own that unit. So the developer lent you some money, and in exchange for settling your debt, you wind up 5 years later giving it back to the developer. Very innovative structure, highly contested by many in the industry, no doubt, but one that the government in St. Lucia allowed for, and that they're currently bound to finalize and finish until that project is fully developed and completed.
So, sounds interesting to you?
Yes, very, very interesting. And then you wonder about the legality of this, and whether you can in fact do that. Because if you're saying that this is my stake, my stake for investing is access to a unit, why are you claiming it back after 5 years? So I'm sure that there are legal issues around this that has to be considered. And I'm not surprised that this is in fact being litigated.
And although I want to state here that, the legislation, the CIP legislation does allow for the sort of, for transactions to happen but after a 5-year period. But as you say, the whole construct, and I believe that's what Eric Majors was alluding to, the whole construct of what that sort of deal or arrangement is by itself, eyebrow raising within itself. So, given all,
is like the bank giving you a loan, as you said. You take a loan and the bank coming back and taking the house back from you. I mean, It does not make much sense to me. But
yeah. Almost like the Dominicans not really owning the house that they're in.
The house, exactly.
So very, very interesting, and I'm sure that has all sorts of implications and yes, in terms of maybe someone wanting now something were to happen and somebody passes, and who is the primary owner, who can you pass that on through your generations? And, are those conversations being had over in Dominica, publicly?
Yes, they've been had, because we've had some very high profile, for example, we've had high profile individuals who've died and who owned those, who lived in those buildings. And the day of their deaths, the buildings were taken away from them. They could not pass it on to their families. The families were evicted. So that is very much an active discussion that we're having in Dominica, because it simply does not belong to the persons who are living in it.
And I'm sure it's going to be of interest to us as well, because the government here is planning on doing the housing programs through CBI. And so it would be, interesting for us to keep our eye on how these things develop, and to keep an eye on it for ourselves here. Exactly. So with all that we have said, the sustainability now of these CBI programs, how can we get ourselves back in shape and to really streamline and to ensure that we can have those programs for the long haul, because they are important to us economically?
Yes, they're very important economically, but there is also a question as to how far you can take it, how far you can push it. For example, Dominica, with a population of 70,000 people, we are approaching 50,000 passports. At some point, if you continue on that trend, you're going to have more Dominicans living with Dominican passports who are not necessarily living in Dominica. That could have implications for elections, could have implications for the future trajectory of the country. So that is something that we have to look at. In terms of its sustainability, it is very difficult to see that program continuing for 10 more years. And the reason why I said it is because there's going to come a time when some kind of fatigue is going to set in. Because bear in mind, the majority of persons who are seeking the passports from St. Kitts, from Dominica, from St. Lucia, Grenada, and so on, the reason why they're wanting those passports is not to live in Dominica or in St. Lucia, but it's to gain access to Europe. It's to gain access to the United Kingdom. And at some point, I suspect the authorities are going to say enough is enough. And bear in mind, the European Union has taken severe action. In fact, they've asked countries within the European Union to stop their programs. So countries like Malta, under serious pressure, at least 3 other countries, I believe, Portugal, Greece, and so on, they have had to stop their program. So if the European Union is demanding that its own members stop the program, then I don't know how long they're going to tolerate programs from the Caribbean region. It's just a matter of time, I suspect.
Yes, and that is such a crucial and vital point there, that there seems to be such fatigue by the EU on this matter. So that brings us to the memorandum of agreement. Do you see this as being the sort of saving grace now for the CBIs?
In the short term, it could be, but that is if the government is able to carry through on the promises. I think that is where we're going to know whether or not it will be sustained, because I suspect that what we're seeing is a very short-term solution. The long-term solution is, and what the countries are asking for, is for the complete shutdown of those programs. Because at the end of the day, the countries, yes, we are benefiting, but we're not getting the full benefits of the program, and we are creating a problem for other countries. So this memorandum of understanding is a temporary fix. It will test the limits and the sincerity of our governments to follow through on the promises. So let's see what happens. But I'm not too optimistic that they can continue for any length of time in doing this. You see, because the way the program has been run, it has been so lucrative for so many people. It has created, it has minted millionaires. You know, one example of this is our our ambassador for oceans and seas to the United Nations, who is a foreigner, who was made the ambassador. He made $7 million out of the Kempinski Hotel, $7 million. And he actually went to court in New York to sue for his share of $7 million. That is one individual making $7 million. And you know, not to talk about the owners who've received just hundreds and hundreds of passports to sell. And so the cost of the hotel is one thing, but they've made millions over. So it has worked well for a few individuals. It has not worked too well for the majority of the populations. And that is where the problem is. I think ultimately our populations are going to be asking questions. Why it is that others are benefiting so much at the expense of us. And at the end of the day, that is our treasure. The passport belongs to us. It is our citizenship. And why should we not be doing more to safeguard it and to keep it protected? And I think more and more those questions are being asked of the governments. And sometimes it will take a change of government for that to happen. As we saw in St. Kitts, you saw a completely different approach from this new prime minister in wanting to make a difference, in wanting to keep it above board, to take away the corrupt part. Might take some of that same change in Dominica or elsewhere for us to get that kind of movement as well.
And you know, one thing that is very touchy for you know, when I'm scouring the region, you know, just taking a cursory glance at some of the comments and talk shows and so forth, people are very concerned about the economic citizens being able to come in and vote. But that is absolutely very possible. Do you know of any instance in Dominica where you have had economic citizens who have participated in the election process by voting?
No, well, we have just a handful of citizens who've settled, and they've done. You see, because there were two issues there. You have the citizenship or being a Dominican who lives overseas, but you have the question of residency. So usually voting goes with residency, and most of the legislation in our countries has to do with the residency criteria that allows you to vote. So even if you're a Dominican holding a Dominican passport, if you're not residing in Dominica for a certain period of time, you're not able to vote. So that is what has saved us for the time being. But if enough people get interested and decide to come and spend the 3 months in Dominica or probably build a home, then that could happen. But for now, we have not seen much of it, because as I said, I think the overwhelming majority of persons who have been seeking our passports is for entry not to Dominica or St. Lucia, but to Europe, England, and elsewhere. And that is why we've not seen much of a focus in terms of voting. But if, for example, an unscrupulous government could change the laws that could say you no longer need to be a resident to vote, you just need to have a passport. All right, and if that happens, you could have an immediate doubling, tripling of the number of voters, and that could create a problem.
Now, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, the ECCB, under the 6 principles, therefore, with the agreement with the U.S., the ECCB has been tapped for it to play more of an active role. I'm going to ask you, why is it that the ECCB had never been active with the CBI programs?
You see, because the ECCB, its main function is to police the financial sector, the financial system. It is not allowed to police government policy, government fiscal policy. That is under the purview of the individual government. So I think for a long time, the CBI program came out as a kind of a fiscal policy type of initiative. How can we increase our revenues? And so that is outside the purview, outside the jurisdiction of the ECCB. The ECCB is involved now because it is involving the financial sector. Because the financial sector is now at risk, that is the reason why the ECCB has been called in to take a closer look, because they're ultimately responsible for the financial sector. They're responsible for the upkeep of the banks. So if, for example, there is a threat, let's say there is a threat to the commercial banking system, because of the behaviors within the CBI program, that will concern them. And that is where they have to place the focus. So it is not that they're late, it's just that because of the way the programs were structured, they could not have interfered, so to speak, in the running of those countries. But now that the financial sector is being impacted, they will have to play an active role in safeguarding the financial system.
Do you have any idea as to what may be the overarching, more specific role that this ECCB would be playing? Or what would you like to see? As an economist, I'm sure you have some thoughts.
Yes, certainly the oversight role, for example, part of the issues have to do with the banks, the banks, the ability to govern themselves, know your customer. Are the banks doing their due diligence? Are they asking the right questions of the authorities? Those kinds of things. I think the ECCB can reinforce those types of things, in terms of the bank's ability to know who they're dealing with, even if it's a government entity, but who are the people at the back of those transactions. They can ask the right questions. Also, when you have huge inflows of monies coming into the jurisdiction, that has implications, for the whole financial system and the way it evolves. So all of those issues are things that should concern the ECCB, but more importantly, the health of the financial system is what matters. Because the last thing you want is for the collapse of a bank in the Caribbean region. And the role of the ECCB is to ensure that does not happen. So working very closely and collaboratively with the banks, but also, performing that function as the main, if you like, the main interlocutor, the main oversight, the one that provides oversight to the banking financial system, that will become increasingly important, and they have to keep playing that role.
And finally, I want to ask you about MSR's class action lawsuit. I'm sure you're familiar with that, how they're going to try to get the money back for St. Kitts Nevis and St. Lucia. But they've called upon all within the OECS to join. In fact, anybody in the Caribbean can join this class action suit. So I'm going to ask you, would you and your United Workers' Party in Dominica, would you join this class action lawsuit? Are you going to help lobby the citizens of Dominica to participate?
Yes, it's something we are looking at very seriously. We have our own legal process that we have embarked on. In fact, we have just filed suit against the government for that very same reason, asking them for the accountability and asking for the funds that are now being held overseas to be brought in. So we have launched our own separate legal court action. We have hired an attorney from Trinidad who is leading that effort for us. But that is something that we're looking at. We have a tremendous interest in that particular lawsuit, and we want to see if we can join efforts and how easy it is, or whether or not our presence will make a difference and whether it will help. So it's something that we are definitely considering. We have not made a final decision on it, but we're certainly looking in that direction.
And how confident are you within your own legal battle that you will be able to get the desired result?
Well, we are very, very confident. And the reason for that confidence is we are going at the very heart of this issue, which is governments, the law which clearly states that government revenues must come through the consolidated fund. All right, and that includes all revenues. So the fact that you have individuals appointed by the government holding monies that are not accounted for is against the law. It's against the Constitution. It's against the laws of Dominica. So we are very confident that the court will look favorably on our request. We also have had some precedents. There was a similar move in Belize, a similar type of arrangement where the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court ruled in favor of those that brought the lawsuit against the government. So we are very confident that with that precedent already been set and the very clear rules concerning how monies that have been generated by the government should be handled, we are very confident that we'll be able to win in that instance. And it will be a win for the people of Dominica, because we need those monies. The country is in trouble. We need to be able to use those monies to help develop our country.
Well, I'm looking forward to having another discussion with you where we'll get an update on how all of those developments are going on in Dominica. I want to thank you very much for your time, and I do hope that you enjoyed our conversation.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you.
We've been speaking there with Dr. Thompson Fontaine. He is a reputed economist as well as a political leader of the United Workers' Party, the opposition United Workers' Party in Dominica. Thank you so much for watching, and I do hope that this conversation has been very helpful to you. I'm Lisa Joseph. See you on the next special report.